Welcome to Busted Speakers. What's my name?
Alex, what's my name?
Cam. Definitely not a cheesy intro there.
Not at all.
Not at all. Today we're reviewing the 20th album from well, not really ex Beatles drummer, because he just left the band at the same time as everyone else. Ringo Starr. What's my name, obviously. This is his 20th album, like I say, and Cam, have you had a much experience with Ringo's solo music in general, like outside of the Beatles?
I haven't. I was honestly surprised to learn that this was his 20th album. Like, I've heard of the All-Star Band, but I don't think I've ever seen any of his music out in the wild. It's rare that I even see more than All Things Must Pass by George Harrison out in the wild, and it was even a miracle when I found his first solo album, Wonderwall Music, but I've never seen any Ringo solo albums in thrift stores or record shops anywhere, so I've never thought about him having this many.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, the All-Star Band seem to mainly compromise or comprise. They don't compromise his music at all. They comprise most of his backing band at any one time, and he's been with them since '89 as a live touring act. Uh, yeah, so in the '70s, he basically rattled off consistently with the albums, actually outselling singles-wise, getting to number one more often than Paul and John did at the time, singles-wise.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's a little known fact retrospectively. But yeah, then he sort of stopped in the 80s pretty much, and then came back in the 90s and pretty much hasn't stopped making albums. So it's easy to see why, if you know that, how he's caught into 20 by now. I've heard about 14 of those, and honestly, they're pretty good. Like, if you're a fan of his tracks in the Beatles, they're not that different, but then again, no one's favourite tracks are the ones Ringo sings. He's a great drummer, I will stand by that. I do think within the Beatles, if you listen to songs like Rain and Tomorrow Never Knows, and well, almost all of them really, I would say his drumming is in general really perfect for them. I'm sure you could generally agree with that.
Yeah, definitely. No problems with him as a drummer.
Okay, so onto this album. I could say, with knowledge of his other music, this is definitely one of the weaker ones I've heard. So if this has put you off hearing any of his other solo albums, Cam, I would say please don't, because he's got much better than this.
That's good to hear, and even this wasn't off putting necessarily. It's the work of a much older music industry
Right.
veteran just trying to do his own thing now, so I wouldn't hold that against him when he was in his 30s just striking out on his own after the Beatles.
So, like I say, most of the lineup is comprised of his all-star band at the time. People like Steve Lukather, his brother-in-law Joe Walsh, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, organist Ben Mintench, among others, who, honestly, backing tracks on this are really good, especially Joe Walsh and Steve Lukather on guitars. Like, even on the two worst songs on the album, in my opinion, they actually have two of the best guitar parts. So, as far as the actual backing band on this album goes, I'd say pretty strong. And uh, as far as Ringo's drumming, I mean, it's pretty simple. I don't know how much his. He could still definitely drum, because I've seen live videos of him holding his own, especially on his older solo stuff. But on here, it never sounded out of place. He could definitely still drum, like, but I wouldn't say he's like advanced, complex rhythmic patterns or anything.
Honestly, I didn't pay much attention to his drumming, which is kind of a shame considering that's what he does, aside from singing, obviously. I do think his drumming is fine for what the album was.
Even though he's mainly known for a drummer, his singing is more of the focal point, because obviously in his solo career he's not doing massive solo drumming masterworks. He's a pop singer now, a rock singer, and okay, I've always thought this about his singing in the Beatles. He's obviously the worst of the four because he's the drummer primarily. And even though he got a song on every album, his singing is kind of flat. He doesn't have much vocal range even back then, which is fine. People like Johnny Cash don't have the greatest vocal range, but when it's used correctly within its own constructs, it can be used fine. And unlike Paul, I'd say his vocals aren't that different from back in the day, or that much worse, really. Like, if you hear live vocals of Beatles songs, it's not much worse. However, he's definitely using a lot of auto tune here.
Yeah, that was a huge detriment to the album.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't even think it's needed. I don't know if he's gotten overly self-conscious about his vocal limitations or something, but it's definitely a lot worse, even from his last album, Give More Love, which I think is significantly stronger than this. It had much better songwriting and had more country-esque songs, which I definitely think is a genre of music Ringo should focus on more, because I think even though if the only country song you know of him is Don't Pass Me By or Act Naturally from the Beatles, maybe you might not agree, but I think when he does country, like his second album, Buku of Blues, he's pretty good. So his last album was definitely better vocally than this one, and this one, the auto tune, it's definitely more noticeable on other songs than some others, like the excruciatingly bad use on the cover of Money, That's What I Want. I don't know if this was notably bad to you, Cam, but to me, it was. I've seen people saying, "Oh, it's a good cover, other than the auto tune." It doesn't really work like that. If you've got a bad element in a song, it makes the song bad, in my view. But this is one of the songs I said had a really potent, great, red hot guitar part, so it's not completely bad, and some of the backing vocals are okay, but damn, the auto tune on this song is terrible, I think.
Yeah, I think Money was the worst offender in terms of the autotune and vocal processing, but it is something that permeates the entire album. And I think somehow it's a little bit worse for him being an older artist using it, because then he can't quite tell if he's using it as a crutch because maybe his voice isn't what it used to be, or because he just wants to use some vocal effect and doesn't really know the best way to apply it to himself.
There's definitely better ways, or at least this is like he heard auto-tune from Believe by Cher and thinks that's the most up-to-date way of masking your vocal limitations, I feel like.
I wouldn't quite go that far.
Well, maybe not that far, yeah, I'm probably being a bit unforgiving there, sorry.
Yeah, and it's hard to tell if it's actual autotune and digital processing or if it's just like really weird multi-tracking.
Maybe.
But it was definitely most noticeable on Money, and I think the other worst offender on this album is the opener, Gotta Get Up to Get Down, which, ignoring the old man yells at cloud lyrics of it, it sounds like a really stiff white guy's version of funk.
Yeah, sort of like weird funk. I've heard one of my friends has been saying it, like Joe Walsh, who's the co-vocalist on this, who does like the weird vocal rap parts, which is definitely the worst like part of the album for me. I hate those parts. I don't know. It's like I don't know. It's just really bad. But yeah, I definitely agree. This is one of the worst songs on the album for me.
Yeah, but aside from that, the album is more or less sonically consistent. It feels kind of like a misplaced 70s AOR album.
Yeah, I feel like he's drawn on that influence because of Steve Lukather, who's the guitarist, is the guitarist from Toto.
Okay, that
So
makes sense.
that might explain why a little bit. I know Ben Mintench, Tom Petty, and the Heartbreakers. So I guess some of that, and Joe Walsh, obviously the Eagles. So I guess that's maybe why. I'd say the best song on here is "Grow Old with Me."
I'd agree.
Do you know the story behind this song?
I know it's a Lennon track. I was reading up on it a little. It was one of the last home demos he recorded, and it was eventually released on Milk and Honey.
That's correct. Obviously, it took on a different meaning. That and another demo that I don't think has seen the light of day, Life Begins at 40, Grow Old With Me, was originally written as like a song to your partner, a love song about growing old together and being comfortable in that. And it's just a very sweet song that obviously became quite sad hearing Lennon's demo released on Milk and Honey. This almost goes back to the like wedding torchbearer song that Lennon wanted to do. And it also features Paul McCartney on bass, which I guess is nice to have. It's not exactly noteworthy bass playing, it's not like Taxman, but it's nice to have him still working with Ringo.
I was a little disappointed that I couldn't identify Paul's vocals specifically.
It's not exactly, he's definitely on backing vocals, but he's not exactly prominent on the song. Like I could not know he was on here if I didn't know that he was on here. But it's nice to have him still playing with Ringo. Obviously, Paul still plays with Paul.
Yeah. And then I couldn't find a source for this quote, but on the Wikipedia page for Grow Old With Me, there's a note that Ringo said that the string arrangement lifted some notes from Here Comes the Sun, so for him it was like all of the Beatles were back together because they all contributed to this somehow.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen that quote floating around as well. I feel like it's a nice thing to think about, but I feel like it's Ringo is like nostalgic, looking back on the past, just fondly remembering the days of him and his four mates. And I think I that's another thing I didn't really notice. that apparently parts are from Here Comes the Sun. But by proxy, I guess the second best song would be the title track because it's a weird rock and roll flavored number. It's really weird if you don't know Ringo's call and response when he does live of "What's my name, Ringo," because it just feels like a weird egotistical catchphrase at this point more than anything else.
Yeah, that kind of struck me as odd that that was the closer, not the opener. You would think that, if you're trying to announce, hey, it's me, you would want that at the beginning of the album,
I guess you gotta get up to get down somewhere,
I guess.
or not on the album if I had my way. But he's got general unifying themes of the album are his usual love and peace, peace and love. Thank God for music. Obviously, a love song to how music helped him in his life, like from Liverpool to LA, the journey his life has made thanks to music. Obviously, spread love, spread peace, send love, spread peace is very similar. It's definitely an easy album to listen to, and that's the thing. It's inherently difficult for me to dislike an album from Ringo because he's just so affably positive and upbeat on every song. Every song has a positive message, inspirational lyrics a few times, just upbeat music in general. So, other than Grow Old With Me, I guess has a sad underlying feeling to it. But in general, this is a happy album, so it's hard, even with its flaws, for me to really dislike it, if you know what I mean.
It is a very likable album with a generally warm and friendly vibe and sentiment to it, which kind of makes the bitterness of Gotta Get Up to Get Down even more confusing. It's just a couple of old guys ranting about Facebook and Twitter as if they've never used them before, which I don't know if they have. But hearing that as the opener kind of sours the rest of the album, except the rest of the album never dips into that again.
Yeah, it's a really weird thing to have as the start of the album now you mention it. It doesn't suggest any of the other positive themes of the rest of the album. It's a bit of a like red herring almost.
Yeah, and the title and the chorus don't even mean anything, especially not in the context of the rest of the lyrics.
And there's a I don't know how to say it, but I distinctly don't enjoy whenever he says I've got the crackers and she's got the cream. Ringo, you're 79. Joe Walsh, when he does his rap vocal bits, why is he rapping like early 80s goofy rap as if he hasn't heard a rap song since then? I don't know. It does just seem like a couple of old dudes goofing off, kind of.
Yeah, so that aside, the album's fine.
Yeah, it's pretty harmless, really. And Ringo's definitely sending a message of love, so it's hard to not reciprocate, I guess.
Who can ask for anything more?
What's my name? I will give this album. I've not actually thought of this. I'll give it like a 5 or a 6. It's okay. It's not terrible. It's fine, but it's nothing especially great. But I don't expect anything especially great from Ringo at this stage because he's already actually proved himself with some past albums that he's got some solid solo work. Aside from a layer of auto tune on every track to varying degrees and a couple of weak tracks, this is okay.
I'm going to be significantly more generous than you and give this a 6.
I gave it a 6, kinda. 5.5. I did say 5, but I also said 6.
Yeah, I can't really argue or add anything to what you said.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Busted Speakers. See you.